Give us a couple of more years as LA. Then we'll rebrand ourselves as the SoCal Angels.
Hey everyone, this is Will O'Toole welcoming you to the first month edition of Park Ridge Sports History, first week of May. So you know that summer's just right around the corner, and with that, all things baseball, and of course the NBA Finals and the NHL Stanley Cup Finals, and we just got over the NFL Draft. But within the next couple of weeks, it'll be, well, I wouldn't even say a couple of weeks, but in the next 2 months, we'll really be heading into the baseball season. Right now, I can't believe that baseball has gotten into 30-some odd games thus far this year. But then again, they're starting the season in March or late March instead of when we were growing up about April 5th, April 6th. And, about 4 or 5 games means quite a bit of difference. Anyway, I thought this week I could spend some time talking about the LA Angels of Anaheim, or the Anaheim Angels of LA, or now back to the LA Angels of the state of California. How's that? But LA, or the Angels, boy, oh boy, I'm even getting confused on that. The California Angels, the LA Angels, the Anaheim Angels, the LA Angels of Anaheim, or the Anaheim Angels of LA have gone under a number of different changes, franchise names in their history since 1961. But I thought it was kind of fascinating because the Angels really started out of the gate. And I want to devote the whole program, hopefully, to the LA Angels. First of all, let me just get this out. The LA Angels started out pretty good. In fact, they had the most wins of any expansion team, winning 71 games their first year with only 90 losses. And their first-year coach, of course, was Bill Rigney, who wasn't bad. What I was looking at when I was discovering the Angels, first of all, I got to get all these little facts out before I really delve into some nostalgia about the Angels. But they have yet to lose 100 games in a season, which is pretty remarkable because as of right now, I know that every team has lost 100 games in a season. I can't think of anything. The expansion teams, the Expos and the Padres in 69 lost 110 games each. The Mets, of course, were 40 and 120 in their initial season. The Astros, I talked about them last year. They lost last week. They lost 100 games back in 75. And you know that over. I can just think the Reds in 82, the terrible Oriole teams in the late 80s. Of course, the Seattle Pilots, Milwaukee Brewers lost 100 games. Somewhere in their thing, I'm pretty sure. But for the most part, the Angels have been kind of, I guess the best way to say, they haven't been real good, but they haven't been real bad. Winning 70 games your first year is kind of remarkable when you think about it, that the Mets only won 40, like I said, and the Expos and the Padres won only 52. But what was interesting is that the Angels came out of the chute really aggressive, really competitive, because after the first year, they were 70-91, but in 62, they actually improved by 16 games in the win column, winning 86 and only losing 76. And I was looking at the first few years, they would win or be over 500, then the next year be under 500, again back up over 500. So they were kind of schizoid that way. But they were competitive enough that they didn't really have any terrible seasons in their initial decade in baseball. And in fact, you could really owe that to two guys, Fred Haney, who actually won Executive of the Year in 1962 for the Angels, and of course, a manager by the name of Bill Rigney. And I just want to show you something about Rigney. I remember Rigney. Let me just get this. Here's Bill Rigney. I kind of remember this card, although I never owned it. I didn't start collecting baseball cards, and maybe it was one of my brothers who had it. I kind of gave away a couple of guys. But Bill Rigney was their first manager, of course. He would go on and manage both Minnesota. I do remember him being the Minnesota manager, and I remember him being um, San Francisco's manager. But he led the Giants from 1956 to 1960 and was only able to muster a best 83-71 in 1959. He did go in 1960. He was 33-25 before he was fired by the Giants. And then he's picked up as the LA Angels manager and promptly goes 70-91. Now, 21 games under 500 your first year is not bad. A couple wins here and there, and now you're talking about 74-88, and maybe even approaching a 500 record. And how do you know he did a pretty good job? Because the following year he won. He was 10 games over 500. Dips again to 70-91. Goes up again to 82-80 in 1964. Dips again to 75-87, and then in 66 he's 80-82. So that was really, when you think about it, for a franchise just 5 years in, the first time they have consecutive under 500 records is about year 4 and 5. That's pretty remarkable. What Rigney was able to accomplish in 67, he's 84-77, and then by 68, the Angels finally lose 90 games. They go 67-95, and then in 1969, after losing 28 of his first 39 games, Rigney is replaced by this fella, Lefty Phillips. Now, I love this card because I did have this card, and I am planning on showing as many of these cards as possible that have the different Angel uniforms, because along with the Angels having different names, franchise names, they've also had a plethora of uniforms. I have, in the past, I love the Angel logo on their baseball hat. It was the lower A with a halo over it on their baseball hat. And in fact, in the cartoon that I did, that logo from the 1970s, the Angels is spelled, it's not capitalized, the A. It's lowercase a, which I kind of liked. It was different with the little halo over it. It was kind of cool. And so Lefty Phillips took over. But let me just finish this. He does go on. I'm kind of glad he's vindicated. Rigney is picked up by Minnesota after Minnesota fired Billy Martin as their manager in 69, after Martin led the Twins to the first AL West division title. But, of course, he got swept by Earl Weaver and those great Oriole teams of Baltimore. They won 100 games every year from 69, 70, and 71. But anyway, Rigney replaces Martin, who would go on to manage Detroit and win with them. And we've done a show on Martin. He's pretty impressive manager. His biggest problem was Billy Martin, but he won wherever he went. There's no question about it, and probably could have won more if really he had given himself a chance. But anyway, Rigney does win 98 games for the Minnesota Twins in 1970, and again they are swept by the Orioles. The following year, they dipped to that 74 win plateau that seems to follow Rigney, 70, 71, 74. And then he is fired again in 1972. Even though, like he was with the Giants, over 500, he is dismissed from the Giants. And then he is dismissed from the Twins after going 36-34 in 1972. What's really unfair to him, and sometimes managers are replaced unfairly, but Oliva was hurt. You have Harmon Killebrew in the late stages of his career. You had Jim Perry coming down. He did win the Cy Young in 1970, but he had a couple kind of average years for Jim Perry. Jim Cott, I think, was then on the White Sox. No, he was on the White Sox by then. So my whole point is that the Twins were in that kind of in that limbo of, changing from the old guard and getting new players in. Yes, they did have Rod Carew, but Rod Carew had been switched to first base or would be eventually. They needed an influx of new blood. And how do you know that? Because they would not be really a part of the, let's say, pennant race for the whole 9 yards for a number of years. The Twins, I know in 1977, Carew kind of keeps them in by flirting with 400, finished with 390, all the rest of it. But you know what I'm saying? The Twins were in the midst of transition, but he still finished over 500 when he was dismissed after 70 games. He goes to the Giants in 1976, so he's out of baseball, at least as a manager, for 4 years. And again, wins 74 games. And that was his first and only year with the Giants. In fact, ready for this? He won 74 games, won 2 twice. He won 70 games twice, and he won 75 games twice. He was actually, I couldn't believe this. He was actually under 500 for his career, even though he won 98 games with the Twins, and he won 86 with the Angels. He was still under 500 with California, Minnesota, and the Giants. 64 lifetime ejections. He is replaced, like I said, by in 1969 by Lefty Phillips, who goes 60 and 63 after the Angels start 11 and 28. Now he goes, so he kind of brings the Angels to a point. Actually, ready for this? After they got rid of Bill Rigney, losing 28 of the first 39 games, they're 3 under. They play 7 games over the next 2 years, because in 70 they finished 86 and 76. And then, unfortunately, Lefty Phillips, he does the same thing that Rigney, bounces down to, or falls down to 76 and 86 in his third and final year with the Angels. That 70 team, though, is kind of interesting, because that's when I really got into baseball, the 70 season. I do know that Clyde Wright made the All-Star game. He won over 20 games. Alex Johnson was on the team. And actually, ready for this, they had a guy by the name of Jim Fregosi, who's probably seen as their franchise player for many years there. I never realized really how good Fregosi was. Now, remember, he is traded in the Nolan Ryan deal. So if you're a Met fan, you know that Fregosi never kind of lived up to the expectations. And, of course, he kind of gets vilified in that trade with Ryan going to the Angels for Fregosi. But Fregosi had been up for a while. He was on the other side of what Bill James liked to say, the 27. He might have been 31 years old. Let me just do something here. I will tell you this. You know what's funny? I thought this was right. The batting leaders in 1970 was Alex Johnson. He hit 329 in 1970. All right. And Baseball Reference and also what I'm using here, MLB, both say 329. They actually give the title to Alex Johnson. All right. He beat out Carl Yastrzemski for the batting title. I think what happened, you had to go to the 4th decimal point because they both hit 329. And I think Yastrzemski hit like 329.4, and I think Johnson hit 329.8. That's how close it was in 1970. And in fact, I do want to get a picture of Alex Johnson. And what I found amazing was I never saw this card, Alex Johnson. But anyway, that 1970 team, let's just talk about it. Alex Johnson was on the team. He makes the All-Star team. That team, California, they had Clyde Wright. They had Andy Messersmith, who wasn't bad. They finished 12 games behind Bill Rigney and the Minnesota Twins in that series. Let me just get this. I'm just trying to think. I'm pretty sure Johnson was named to the All-Star team. Yeah, he was. Alex actually had 14 homers, 86 RBIs, probably his pinnacle year, 329, 370 on-base percentage, scored 85 runs, had 200 hits, the only time in his career. He was a really good player, really good hitter, let's just say that. Not a good fielder. He came up with the Cardinals. Came up with Philly. But I kind of remember him being like with Bobby Tolan, Lou Brock, Kurt Flood, with those St. Louis teams in 67 and 66. He does go to the Reds, where he really hit a ton for them, 312, 315, but then is sent to the California Angels. He actually is sent in the Jim McLaughlin deal. Now, McLaughlin unfortunately died, I think, at an early age of cancer, like 4 or 5 years after spending 4 or 5 years with the Cincinnati Reds. But I was looking, and Alex Johnson was actually their first batting champion. But for some reason, I always thought Yaz won. I always thought he had the decimal point. But they had to go to the fourth digit or the fourth column, and that's where Alex Johnson won it. Nevertheless, Baseball Reference has it, MLB, so I'm going with that. And of course, their record keeping is better than my memory at this point. And Alex Johnson was their first batting champ. But the reason why I want to focus on that 70 team is Roland Hedman was in charge of their scouting. And of course, he had some years with the White Sox and also with the Baltimore Orioles. But Fregosi was on that team. Now, Fregosi had a great year, 22 homers, 82 RBIs, 278 batting average. Fregosi actually, at that point, had made a number of all-star teams, including the 70 team. In fact, he was the backup to Louis Aparicio, but that would be his last all-star game. Yes, when he went to the Mets for the season starting 1972, he would turn 30, but he had been injured. And that's what people forget. And I always felt that Fregosi took a lot of abuse. He was hurt. He was older. Of course, Ryan has some great years, Hall of Fame years with the Angels. What can I say? And Fregosi, I always felt, took a little bit too much of the criticism when it really wasn't his fault. I know that from reading about Fregosi, he did keep his home in California. So maybe he just wasn't happy being in New York. But put it this way, after hitting 22 home runs in 1970, and playing 158 games, that 70 team was pretty good. He only played 107 the following year, 71, and then 101 in 1972 with the Mets. I think he had hurt his shoulder and then his ankle. But put it this way, in those 2 years, he only hit 10 home runs combined with 65 RBIs. Put it this way, with California, he had more home runs in that 70 season than any other time in his career, more RBIs than any time in his career. And the shame of it is, I know that California Angel team of 1970 was pretty solid. They had Jim Spencer at first base, a future Yankee. They had Sandy Alomar, of course, the father of Roberto and Sandy Alomar Jr., who wasn't bad, solid player, hit 251. I think he led the league a couple of times in stolen bases, but he had a solid year for the Angels in 1970. They had Fregosi, great year, monster year. He drew 69 walks that year. Then they had a really solid third baseman, defensively anyway, Ken McMullen, who had 14 home runs. He was traded, I believe, during the season from the Washington Senators to the Angels, and he hit 14 homers, 61 RBIs. I just remember McMullen always being a pretty good defensive third baseman. They had Alex Johnson, Jay Johnston, and Roger Repose manning the outfield. That Angel outfield combined for, ready for this, 43 home runs and 147. Let me just add on a couple more here. 147 and 25, 162 RBIs or 172 RBIs. Not bad from your outfield. And of course, Jim Spencer had a solid year, 12 and 68, 274. So they weren't bad. They had ton of guys playing backup for them, including Rick Richard, who would go on to the Angels or to the White Sox. They would have Tom Egan, who I also believe would play for the White Sox. They had Doug Griffin, who would go on to play for the Red Sox. Aurelio Rodriguez was at third base, and he would eventually go to he would eventually wind up with the Detroit Tigers. And this was their pitching staff that year. Wasn't bad. Clyde Wright won 22 games. A guy by the name of Tom Murphy, who was known more for being a relief pitcher, won 16 games for that Angel team. Rudy May, you Yankee fans will know, and so will all Oriole fans know. Rudy May was a pretty good pitcher. Solid. Wasn't going to be an ace of his staff, but was solid. Plus, he was a lefty. Andy Messersmith only won 11 games that year, but he was a solid pitcher. And, of course, he would make his name with the free agency system, being freed in 1975 or be one of the big guys in that whole thing. May, I was surprised. I'm just looking at his career. He's 152 and 156. But I'm telling you, he's one of those guys that was a better pitcher than that. 3.46 ERA. But with the Yankees, he was 8-4. Then he pitched for the Yankees and Baltimore, where he went 15-10 in 1976. He was 14-12, with the Yankees in 1975. They trade him in 1976, and he went 15-10. So over those 2 years playing for New York and Baltimore, he won 29 games and 22 losses in the AL East, which was a tough division. Then he goes in 1977 and wins 18 games for the Orioles as they finished in third place behind the Yankees and the Red Sox. Leeds comes back to the Yankees. You Yankee fans will love this. After pitching for Montreal, goes 15-5 in 1980 and leads the league with a 2.46 ERA. And then it's unfair. He pitches for the Yankees 3 more years, and he goes a combined 13-22. The shame is, had he not pitched at age 38, had he just hung it up the year before, he would have finished 151 and 151. But he was a better pitcher than that. He was really a better pitcher than that. I mean, in the 1973 Angels, he was 7-17. He was in 1970 7-13, but those were around seasons where he went 10-13, 11-12, and 12-11. That 70 team is one that stands out for me. That was led by Lefty Phillips as their manager, like I said, Jim Fregosi on that team. And, of course, another guy by the name of Alex Johnson. I just want to show this one again. I never saw this card. I never had this card, but I don't know whether this is something that was done later or not. I'd never seen it on one of the 70 cards before, and that was traded. Now, I've had baseball cards from Topps and all the rest of it, which they would start the season. They would issue the cards, I think, in February, and you'd see traded across the bottom. Or else they would black out the guy's cap from the previous team to the new team and put that the name of the new team. Now, why I have these guys up here, Ohtani, Don Baylor, Vlad Guerrero, and, of course, Mike Trout. They were the first MVPs, or they make up the 9 MVP winners for the California Angels. And, of course, I love this. Don Baylor, who was originally an Oriole, would go to the Angels and win the MVP in 1979. And as I said, I always felt that Ken Singleton should have won that year. Let me just give you his numbers for the Angels. I just love doing this. And, of course, I have to thank Baseball Reference, of course, always giving me information at my fingertips, although when they're at my fingertips, it seems to be a real torture. Now, the Angels that year won 88 games. They did finish first in the West. They lost to the Orioles 3-1. Baylor, though, doesn't even lead and this has been my big problem. I'm not saying that WAR is everything, but he only had 3.7 WAR. The guy who was the leader in WAR that year was a former teammate of his in Baltimore, Bobby Grich, who does not get enough attention for the Hall of Fame. Solid player. His problem was he never played in a World Series, and of the playoff teams that he made, they always got eliminated, obviously, in the playoff rounds. But ready for this? Here's what Baylor did that year. He does play all 162 games. Drew 71 walks. He stole 22 bases, but was caught 12 times. Had 186 hits, 120 runs scored, 33 doubles, 3 triples, 36 home runs, 139 RBIs. Now, that team had some pretty good guys on it, having outstanding years. They had Bert Campaneris, who came over from Texas after signing with Texas after leaving Oakland. And he came up, age 37, played 85 games, hit .234, man shortstop. Bobby Grich, of course, was the guy. 30 home runs, 30 doubles, 5 triples, 101 RBIs, 294 batting average, 365 on-base percentage with 78 runs scored. Probably, to be fair to Baylor, having all those runs scored, I mean, almost over 40 more, probably helped solidify his status as the MVP in the league. But on that team was also Rod Carew at age 33, 3 home runs, 44 RBIs, 318 batting average. Boy, where we've seen that before in Rod Carew's career, with 78 runs scored. And the guy who really has a renaissance with the California Angels is Brian Downing, 12 homers, 75 RBIs, 326 batting average. Ready for this? Here are some of the other guys on that team. Carney Lansford, 1979, 287. They had Willie Mays Aikens, 2181, hit 280 as their DH, age 24. And they had a number of guys who had Oriole blood in them, like Larry Harlow, like Merv Redeman. And they also had, I'm just trying to think if there are a couple others. I had mentioned Don Ossie, who I think also pitched for the Orioles. Ossie, of course, yes. So they had a number of Baltimore or future Oriole players on their team. Ossie, of course, I do believe is the first pitcher. Well, Baseball Encyclopedia, AASE. I think he follows Henry and Tommy Aaron in the thing, but he might be the first pitcher listed if you go that way. Brian Downing, just to tell you, here was a guy who rebuilt his offense. When he first came up with the White Sox, he hit a total of 26 home runs from 1973 to 1977. 26 home runs total, with 110, 135, 139 total RBIs. He is traded to the Angels in 78, and in 133 games, hit 7 homers, 46 RBIs. But you can see the improvement, because in 1979, he really explodes. 12 homers, 75 RBIs, 326 batting average, dips in 80 and 81, but then has monster years. Ready for this? Really some unbelievable years. 28 and 84, 281 in 1982 when California won the West. 19 and 53, 246. 23, 91, 275. And all along, what he has really doubled for the most part is his walks per season. 86, 62, and 70. Then he draws 78 walks, hits 20 and 85 in 1985. 20 and 95 in 1986 when the Red Sox ousted the Angels in an unbelievable playoff series. He drew 90 walks that year. Then in 1987, 29.77, had 110 runs scored, 272 batting average, and for the first time in his career has an on-base percentage of 400 as he drew a league-leading 106 walks. Now, here was a catcher actually playing the outfield and then DH, who would be the leadoff hitter. It's not too often. But even as his career wound down, he was still drawing tons of walks. I always think this now. I'm starting to think this. If you can draw a walk every 3 games, that's pretty good. And that's what he was actually doing. 81, 56, 50, 58, 62. So he's getting on base, almost having an on-base percentage almost 100 points higher than his batting average in many of the seasons. Put it this way. In 1990, he drew 50 walks, hit 273, but had a 374 on-base percentage. In 1991 with Texas, he drew 70 walks, hit 278, had a 377 on-base percentage. And with Texas in his final year, at age 41, had his highest on-base percentage, with the exception of 1979, having a 407. I thought 400 was his highest. First time in 400. My mistake. He actually did it in 1979. But drew 58 walks at age 41, playing 107 games with a 407 on-base percentage, 10 homers, 39 RBIs. But I think what's kind of remarkable, 53 runs scored for that team. Now, before I get all entrenched with those particular seasons, let me go on with this. The Angels, like I said, never lost 100 games. They've only had one 100 season in their franchise history. They have won in their franchise history 90 games 11 times. Like I said, the one World Series win over the Giants. Now this year, they are starting off at 12-21. They are on a pace to lose a franchise first 100 games. So that'll be interesting. Now, their first All-Star, 1961, was a guy by the name, ready? They actually had 2, Ken McBride and Ryan Doring. Now, McBride had some promise. Ryan Doring, of course, came over from the Yankees. He was known as a relief pitcher, had a good season there. I'll bring up both guys. McBride, I know because I was doing some investigating on him, but McBride hurt his arm, and that led to an abbreviated career. 1961, when the Angels won those 70 games. Ready for this? Here's what their team looked like. Earl Averill, Steve Bilko, and as my brother Ed would say, Bilko was who the character Bilko for You Can Never Get Rich or the Phil Silvers Show is actually named for. I didn't realize it until he told me that. Ken Aspromonte, brother of Bob Aspromonte, Joe Coppy, Eddie Yost, Leon Wagner, who was a solid player, came up with he's another guy with the Giants I was talking about last week. He was another giant outfielder that they couldn't find a position for. And you know what the shame is? It's too bad he didn't have a little bit more defensive talent. Maybe the Giants could have made him into a second baseman. I mean, with that 61 team, Wagner would hit 28 home runs. Now, I know they were playing in Wrigley Field, which was a bandbox. I get all that. But Wagner did have power. In fact, I'll show you this. Wagner had power that because he would go to Cleveland, and that was that mistake by the Lake Municipal Stadium. He had 31 home runs, then 28, then 23. So the guy had legit power. But with the 62 Angels, he makes his first All-Star team, hits 37 homers, 107 RBIs. But here are a couple other guys. Ted Kluszewski, who I think hits the first home run in Angel history. Rocky Bridges was on that team, of course. Anybody who knows anything about Rocky Bridges, he was a legend in minor league managing circles and never got a shot at the major league level, I do not believe. But Ken McBride in 1961 won 12 games for the Angels. Eli Graba GRBA. I think I pronounced his name right. Ted Bousfield and Ron Moeller made up the starting core. And Ryan Doran was 6-12 that year with a 5.18 ERA, yet still made the All-Star team. I was looking what happened. He started off pretty good with 2 saves, and then he kind of fell apart mid-season, Ryan Doran. But he was able to get his ERA at one point in the season for like 2-3 weeks, and it was around the All-Star game. He was unhittable, and he was always known for throwing the first pitch from his warm-up on the mound when he came in right over the heads of everybody to instill some fear in the batters that he was going to face. But ready for this? Ken McBride did lead that team with a 4.2 WAR. He won 40 games, lost 50, had a 3.79 ERA. Here's the point. In his first 3 seasons with the Angels, coming over from the White Sox where he was 0-2, he actually won 36 games and lost 32. So he was over 500 for a team that was under 500. His ERA was solid, 365, 350, and 326. And then I think he got a sore arm, and then he was really finished by the age of 29. Put it this way, in 1964 and 65, he was a combined 4-16. You take that out, and he's 36-14. 36-34 for his career. So he had promise. That 64 team, though, ready for this? I'm going to show you this. But here's Ken McBride. He actually pitched a couple of innings in that 61. That was when they were having 2 All-Star games. And Ryan Doran. Just want to show you. The first Cy Young Award winners for the Angels. It's amazing because everybody thinks it was Nolan Ryan and he never won one for them. And in fact, I'll get back to that. But I'm going to give you the first one. Well, I'm going to give you the second one. Bartolo Colon. And everybody remembers him with the Mets hitting his first and only home run. Dave Garcia, of course, replaces Jim Fregosi as manager of the Angels, or excuse me, the other way around. I forgot to tell you that Fregosi would manage the Angels. Let me get that picture of Fregosi. Fregosi would manage the Angels and lead them to the 79 American League West division. But, of course, they would fall to the Baltimore Orioles. Dick Donovan I threw in there because I'm saying to myself, that 70 and 91 first-year team, the Angels actually sent 2 All-Stars to the All-Star games. Conversely, Dick Donovan was the only All-Star for Washington, and one of the games was in Washington. The thing is, Donovan never got into the game in Washington. The first Cy Young Award winner for the Los Angeles Angels was none other than Dean Chance. Now, I will tell you this. I am sure this was I had these coins. I didn't have the Dean Chance coins. In 1971, I think Topps reissued the coin sets, and they were kind of cool to collect. And I still have about 50 of, I think they made 86 of these coins, but they're really cool. And I rather than get a picture of him, a Topps baseball card, I figured I'd show the fans at home who used to collect the baseball cards and a little bit of nostalgia if they can remember collecting the coins, because they were a lot of fun to collect. And they sounded just really, they felt like doubloons, you know, in your hand, but you felt like you had real currency in the palm of your hands. Ready for this, though? Chance wins 20 games that year with a 1.65 ERA. They had another guy by the name of Fred Newman, 13-10. Bo Belinsky, who was, along with Dean Chance, not only were they Mound's brethren, but they were quite the pair off the field as well. Bo Belinsky was a talent that never saw his talent fulfilled, and Ken McBride was on that team, 4-13. But I think what they were looking at was, can you imagine if McBride doesn't get hurt, if Belinsky had maybe matured and become a major league pitcher on the mound, that rotation wasn't bad. Now, I know that Chance also had some arm troubles later on as well. Vlad Guerrero, of course, an MVP. Ohtani, an MVP twice. And, of course, Mike Trout, the only guy I got a picture of Mike Trout. 3-time MVP for the Angels. Vic Power I put in there real quick because I know I'm running out of time. He's actually the first Gold Glove winner for the California Angels. And, of course, Power was a really good player. I would say this about Vic Power. Power played for a number of teams, Cleveland, Kansas City, and as I mentioned, with California. And he had a great stick. You know, he was the kind of guy, 25, 90, 285, really good glove, but was moved around quite a bit, kind of like an Orlando Cepeda, was traded around a bit. And it's a shame that he never played for any team that had really some pennant hopes, because he's a guy that you might be talking about now instead of saying, yeah, I remember him. Real good player, solid, all the rest of it. This is the story of the California, LA, Angels, Los Angeles, or Anaheim of the Los Angeles Angels, California Angels, Anaheim Angels, story of the Angels baseball franchise. Will O'Toole, thanking you for joining Park Ridge Sports History. Be back next week with another episode. Thanks for watching.